Okay, I want to document my thoughts on KPIs and measuring a company and some of the key problems I've run into with defining those terms. Now, I guess I should quickly go through any company typically has KPIs, and the simplest KPI is to make a profit. Uh, that is KPI, key point indicator, right? So if I'm not turning a profit, I don't have a business. So that's pretty key. Somewhere along the way, the KPIs became the buzzword, and then I hear a lot of people talking about KPIs without really understanding KPIs. And KPIs are just different metrics or measurement points that a company can put in place to see how the company is doing. And that gets at the core of what I'm wanting to document here. I've noticed this, it gets tricky because I think it gets into the phantom photon experiment. I think that's what it's called. But the thing with KPIs is you're using them to measure a company. Well, the moment you measure the company, you now create a target point. And then that KPI is no longer an indicator. Now it's a goal to be achieved. Now, sometimes that's exactly what you want, and clever people will design their KPIs in such a way to make sure it meets the company or progresses people towards the goals of the company. But a lot of times there can be unintended consequences with the progression towards the KPIs. The goal becomes the only thing, and typically people lose sight of why the KPI was there in the first place. And that kind of brings me to the particular problem that I've kind of been thinking through as a thought experiment of if I have a successful business and I want to keep that successful business on track, by nature of that, I have to measure that and define what the success is. But as soon as I measure that and define what the success is, I create a target point. So the target point can potentially skew the overall success of the company, because if I didn't pick a good target point, then I've chosen poorly and unintentionally moved the company towards a goal that wasn't actually the goal. I just wanted to measure, like, simply put, like if I make KPI a certain amount of profits, people will start taking measures to ensure that profits are maximized. Well, that has a habit of completely eroding the company if that's the only metric, right? There's all kinds of gimmicks and all kinds of things I can do if my only goal is to maximize profits. And those will work for a while, but eventually they take a toll on the company. So, like, if I maximize profits without being concerned about quality, then eventually quality will suffer to meet the goal of making profits, because it's a trickle-down effect. Everybody wants to be successful in their job, and if they find out, like, hey, the person with the most sales is the one being rewarded by nature of the KPI. So that's where that unintended consequence comes in. But then you're constantly left with the problem that the business or the people in charge of the business need to measure the success of the business, because the point of the business is to make money. So then you have to kind of be clever with your KPIs. So I know that high quality is valuable to my customer. Therefore, high quality becomes the KPI, not the money. But then the way we talk in our conversations skews that. So if I constantly say on paper, quality, 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 but in reality, I complain and talk about profits, I'm unintentionally steering that KPI towards profit over quality control. And that's, once again, fundamentally the problem. The moment I've measured or unspoken or spoken about the specifics of what's being looked at, I have influenced the trajectory and the outcome. So then basically I go round and round and round with this particular problem. Another word for KPIs would be incentives, or fulfillment of KPI would be an incentive. So like if people have bonus structures set to sales or whatever, that's the incentive for them to go through that. Incentive could be as simple as do a good job so that I get to keep my job. You know, some people are, that's all they're going for. and that ends up making the KPI. And I guess I'm really getting into a rambling point. So, what really the problem is you have to measure the success of the company. But the moment you measure the success of the company, you give unintended markers as to what is expected. So, like, I don't know, as I feel like I have to keep those numbers private. And then, but then, like, if you have a top 5 C-suite, you have to share those numbers so that the goal is united and the health of the company is in check. But as soon as you tell those numbers to the top C-suite, you've now unintentionally influenced their outlook on the company, unless you give them false indicators that drive towards your total. I don't know. It goes round and round and round. Now, I think if a person understands the nuance of the indicator, then they would be able to step outside that indicator rather than just taking it, or chasing it, not taking it. And perhaps that's a goal, or that's the type of person to look for that would be in these higher level positions, not somebody just blindly blazing away towards this KPI. I don't know. Because see, the simple thing would be mask all the KPIs and then don't tell anybody what you're measuring so that everybody's constantly working towards, different things and potential quality outputs. But the problem is also, I can use KPIs or incentives as a really good feedback loop. So perhaps sales are down and I need sales to come up. So if I implement, sales and go down the list of like fulfillment time, sale time, make sure I don't drop the ball, I can use those incentives and those KPIs to influence where I want the company to go. It gets real tricky the more I think about it. And yeah, it just gets real tricky the more I think about it. I've been presenting this like I'm explaining all of it to you, but really I'm marking this for myself. At first, when I first thought about it, I thought it was really simple. It was like, okay, well, I will build a company, and then I will never tell anybody what I'm measuring, and I will just let them assume that these numbers are good, but I'll actually mask my true numbers. And the more I've thought about that is, well, that offers them no stability and nothing to work towards. So that could be problematic. But as the thought experiment has taught me as I've moved into management positions to be very careful with my words, because I don't necessarily know how the person below me is going to receive those words. Offhanded downtime is a particular topic where I work, and that's the topic that continuously comes forward. Now, we say lots of other things, but the emotional reactions and the movements, the personnel changes, the thing that gets the energy is when downtime is bad or high, an undesirable effect. And that sends a message that the only metric that we care about is downtime, when that's not actually the case. But that's been the big lesson for me in doing that, is realizing like the way I present information, the stuff I unintentionally or naturally focus on is what's going to be translated out. It's not what I say. And I think that's the bigger lesson with the KPIs, is being extremely mindful of how the information is presented and what is rewarded and what is discussed and what is talked about. It's kind of this is a point in a maturing conversation, so this is for me to document. Several of these conversations have been just specifically for me to document for my own notes for later. So, yeah, that's my first one since my travels. and getting my thoughts straight is definitely more difficult after a lot of flying. But anyway, that's that one. Thanks.